airbrush or wet paint is our inspiration today. Hi, I'm Julie Fei Fan Balzer, your host, and I brought this really cool dimensional tree project with me. Now it actually looks dimensional for a couple of different reasons, and I'm gonna let you in on all of my tricks. So I happen to be working on a piece of canvas board, but you could use any surface that you'd like. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply the paint directly to my canvas. Now this is one of my favorite ways to work because it really allows you to have fun and not worry too much. I'm using 3 colors. You can see that. I have red, yellow, and white. Then I have a dry brush, and I'm just gonna scrub the paint in. You can see I'm not worried about the colors mixing. In fact, I want them to mix, and I'm just gonna bring that white in, and you can see how it is no longer white. Now you want the paint to be slightly dimensional here because you wanna be able to do something called sgraffito, which sounds super fancy, but all it means is I'm taking the back of my brush and I'm just scratching in, and this is creating texture, which is the first step in really creating dimension here. So I'm gonna go ahead and let that dry. So I have one here that is already dry. Okay, you can see it right there. The next step is I want to pick a stencil, and I have found that stencils with a design like this tree are the easiest to use. Now I have a small canvas, so you might think, okay, small canvas, small stencil, but actually I think it looks a little bit better and more like finished art if you use a really big stencil that hangs off the edge. So what I'm gonna do is line this up, and what I mean by hang off the edge is I wanna see just a portion of the tree, kind of the way that, in a very painterly way. Then what I'm gonna do is I am gonna stencil that tree in black. So you wanna use a heavy body paint, cosmetic wedge sponge. I'm gonna dab into my paint. This is too much paint, it's gonna roll under. I wanna dab off, so that actually what I have on here is very little paint. Then I'm gonna pounce up and down through here. Now it is better to do 2 thin coats than to do 1 really thick coat, and that's really important. I think one of the things about stenciling is it becomes kind of like doodling to me, but with a safety net, because it's all about like rhythm, relaxing, patience. If you do a really thick coat, the tendency is for the paint to roll under the stencil so you don't get some nice clean lines. Whereas if you do 2 thin coats where you let it dry in between, then it just gives you that really nice opaque look that you're looking for so that you get that entire layer done. So I would take my time and go over this. If you're worried, you can see I'm holding this. You can use tape to keep it in place instead if that's more comfortable for you. But each layer that I add of the black is just gonna add some more opacity to it. So I take my time and finish that whole thing out. Okay, and eventually what it will look like when I do that is it will look like this, right? Nice, opaque, thick, looks great. So now we're ready to create our first shadow. This is really exciting. So what you wanna do is you wanna place your stencil back over your design, okay? And I can see that it fits perfectly, but I don't want it to fit perfectly. I wanna bump the stencil up and over. Can you see that, how I bumped it up and over? That's really important because this is creating basically a drop shadow. That's exactly what we want. So now, because I am a little bit gonna be picky about the placement here, I am actually gonna take a moment to just go ahead and tape this down. Now I think my stencil is a little bit wet and still has some paint on it. So you wanna make sure that you're using a dry stencil because we don't want the next layer of paint to transfer at all. So I'm just gonna take a paper towel and make sure that I get off any excess paint that's on there. So now we get to the next level of dimension. We're gonna be using molding paste. Now there are a bunch of different molding paste to choose from. I just wanna use any white modeling paste. That's what's gonna work. So I like to use a palette knife to do this. You can also use like a credit card or a hotel room key, but simply put, I take my palette knife and I use the back side of it. And I'm gonna dig into my modeling paste here. And then I'm gonna scrape across the stencil, just like this. It's almost like frosting a cake. You can see how I can scrape the excess back. So you may think you're using a lot, but then actually you're not, because you're scraping, because you want it to be a little thinner. Now, if you wanted it to be super thick and even more dimensional, you could leave that really thick layer. But I just keep going back into that modeling paste and through my stencil. Now take your time with this. You really don't want this to wiggle around, but notice how I'm not going side to side in all directions. I'm pretty much going in a single direction. And this is because, again, I don't want that roll under. But if you're a neat freak, I'm gonna tell you, try modeling paste, because one of the things is it creates really hard, beautiful lines that are hard to beat when it comes to a stencil. I really love it. So that's why I'm taking my time to kind of massage, so to speak, all of this in here, okay? So once you are satisfied and it looks like it's okay, then go ahead, pull your tape off, and pull your stencil off. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, it looks so good already, right? And you can see how that has a really dimensional edge. So a couple cleanup things. The first is you can take a baby wipe and just clean up the edges of the canvas, which I would take the time to do. I'm gonna put that aside for now. The other thing is it's important to clean the modeling paste off of your stencil. So the way that I do that is just put down a paper towel or something else, and then also clean your palette knife, because modeling paste when it dries is pretty permanent. Then I'm just gonna take a baby wipe and rub over the top. I don't like to run this in the sink because I don't want this stuff down my drain, right? I'd much rather put it into my garbage can. So this is just a good practice to get into. I often think we don't talk about cleaning our supplies enough. I generally won't clean a supply unless it's somehow gonna ruin it or change the supply in a way that I wouldn't like. If this modeling paste does dry on your stencil, it will create some problems for you in terms of using the stencil again. And actually, if you did this on paper instead of paper towel, it would be a beautiful addition. But you can see how easy and quick that is. So a couple seconds of just cleaning it up will really help you in the long run. Okay, so next step, which is your modeling paste has dried. Well, this is where your stencil comes back into play one more time, because this time what we're gonna do is place this back over. So again, I'm just trying to place it over the white part, not the black part. And now I can go ahead and I can stencil my leaves. I like to do them multiple colors, but you certainly don't have to. It's totally up to you. But you can really get in there now and get all these different parts. And don't forget about the branches and all of that stuff. But because you have the stencil on here, it's like a guide. So I barely have to think about anything. I just get to play and enjoy the different colors that I have to play with. And that's my favorite kind of art making, because it's just relaxing and easy. Who doesn't like that? So this is actually something that you can do with kids, you know, because again, the stencil makes it so easy for them. So I'm just gonna keep going through here. Now, one of the things is people sometimes worry when they're doing, like, let's say the branches, that they're getting some of the leaves. Don't worry about that, because guess what trees are? They're multicolored, they have lots of variegation, you know what I mean? They're not flat things, and leaves are lots of different colors. So that's one of the reasons I love doing natural objects. So I would keep working on this and just playing with it and having fun. And you could do lots of different shapes of all kinds, but that looks like it's almost covered. Pull off the stencil for the magic moment, right? Where you can see that you're starting to see the finished work. So if we look at this one that's all dried and all done, now when you look at all that dimension, you can see it's created with the sgraffito on the bottom layer, the black shadow, the white modeling paste, and finally, all of the texture of the paint.